So thank you for joining us today for our Sex Speak event. I'm Ashley Lopez, she, her, co-president of Reproductive Health Interest Group at the Fielding School of Public Health, and I will be moderating the session along with Kate Lewis, she, her, the other co-president of RHIG. Please join me in welcoming Al Fine, CEO of Dame Products and Forbes 30 Under 30 entrepreneur. They've accomplished so much within the sexual wellness space, including getting rights to advertise sex toys in public transit, addressing the pleasure gap, and advocating for non-binary inclusion in sexual wellness. Again, we are so excited to have Al join us today to further explore and have a conversation about some of these topics. There'll be time at the end for questions and answers from the audience. So to get things started, could you please share the story of how you became interested in sexual wellness and how you founded Dame Products?
I became interested in sexual wellness, half because I'm a sexual being. And I think, I was very interested in sexuality, probably at maybe a younger age than others. And remember early on having a few experiences that really kind of, perked me up. So one of them was when I was 6 years old. My cool aunt who lived in Manhattan took me to a party. I met some drag queens. Nobody has taught me more about how to be a woman than a drag queen. And I was also able to ask all these honest questions as a 6-year-old, which is wait, are you a boy or are you a girl? And what is gender? What is sex? And I learned all of this stuff. And I brought it back to my first grade class and explained what it meant to be a drag queen versus to be transgender, though at the time I learned the word transsexual. And I got in trouble, I was sent to the principal's office. They called my parents. Nobody was able to explain to me what I had done was wrong. I didn't hurt anybody. I didn't lie. I don't even think they understood while I was getting in trouble, but it felt like people needed to be talked to. My aunts, parents were really upset with my aunt. So that was the first time I was wait, why is this conversation that is so fascinating? Why is this idea that we could be more than just a boy or a girl, being just shot down when it's obviously, to me, it just felt so illuminating. And there was no good answer for why we couldn't talk about it, why this was socially inappropriate. And then also when, in 6th grade, I think, when I had my first kiss, and, the boy got high fives and I got dirty looks, I was, it was in front of 10 people, where everybody stands around in a circle and then they count down and then you kiss. Just the things, I don't know if that is still what people did when you guys were growing up, or maybe we're similar ages, I don't know. But it's very weird. Being in middle school is very weird. Anyway, I think the difference in reactions around the exact same action was infuriating. For me, it was definitely a more early experience with sexism and the double standard. I felt very, ultimately slut shamed. And if I could go back in time, I would definitely tell myself no, that was cool. You're cool. Or you did exactly what this other person did. And if it feels good to you, don't let anybody else make you not feel good for it. So I think those are the earlier experiences of where I got really kind of passionate about sexuality in this more female form, and what that was. And yeah, it continued on. I got HPV and started talking, needed to talk to everybody about HPV because nobody had told me about it. And I thought I had cancer. And I was sexually assaulted when I ran my college's sex week, ironically enough. And I think that also, like, there were so many moments for me where sex really impacted my mental health. Sex really impacted my understanding of the world. I don't know, I guess every time somebody like would tell me to shut up, but couldn't give me a good reason why I should stop talking about it, I just felt like so compelled to talk about it more. How was that?
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your kind of like journey that brought to where you are now. So I was wondering if you could sort of describe for the group a little bit about how coming from all those things in your background that you just described, how you then went on to found Dame Products, and maybe give a little bit of an overview about what the company is and what you all do for the folks on the call who might not be familiar with it yet.
Sure. So I run a business called Dame, and we make sexual wellness products. So we design and innovate products as well as content and community that helps support people's ability to getting connected with their pleasure. That has mostly looked like vibrators, lubricants, massage oils, body positioning products, supplements, and we're going to continue to expand into any product that helps people have safe, healthy sex. And the way it kind of got started was after I got my master's in clinical psychology. I wanted to be a sex therapist. And after I got my master's, I just decided I wanted to take a break before really pursuing my PhD. And ended up working at a small shampoo company that was like literally 3 people. And I loved entrepreneurialism. I would say I'm like fairly impatient. I wouldn't say I'm like the best listener. And those are not great traits for becoming a therapist. Though I still have like a really, I do think those are still just important traits in management. And though impatience can be great for being an entrepreneur, but you got to figure out how to balance that with being a manager and knowing things, take time. So when I worked at this really small, fast, all natural baby care product company, I really just fell in love with running a business. And I had this little book where I wrote down all of my business ideas. All of them were around interpersonal relationships, and this category of the physical products, specifically vibrators, honestly, it just seems so obvious that all my friends own a vibrator and none of them could name the brand. And that like the brands, one, were almost all, I think they all were run by men at the time. They often featured women taking off their stiletto heels, going like, shh, very male gazy, while like I knew, like my vibrator, like just somewhere in my bed, and I'd be like in my pajamas. Like I was definitely not wearing those stilettos and a silk gown. Like it was a really different experience of what was being marketed to me as sexy and what these products really meant to me in my life. And I thought that through authentically doing that, or sharing that, we could have a brand that was centered a little bit more in authenticity, wellness, not the male gaze. Plus, I came up with like some really interesting, innovative toy ideas, like product concepts, which I don't think it's because like I'm very smart. I think it's because literally very few people with vulvas were designing and thinking about what they really wanted from these products and being truly active participants. So our first product is Eva, which is a hands-free vibrator that you can wear during sex. And I'm sure I have one. I do. Oh, you know what's cool, guys? Sorry. I have this is the very first box, holding it upside down. And this is where the brand is now. So that's cool. And this is Eva. It's a hands-free vibrator you can wear during sex. So it's got these like bendable wings that tuck underneath the labia. And then you can wear it while you're having penetrative sex. I met engineer who went to MIT, who was like also super passionate about this. And the two of us together launched it on Indiegogo, which is a crowdfunding site, and raised over $500,000 in 45 days. And I was able to really bootstrap this business for the first 6 years and continue to innovate, make more products. And yeah, that is, did I answer the question? Okay, well then I'll stop.
Thank you. No, that was just like so insightful, and it's nice hearing like the journey of Dame. So
We're
Dame,
still on it,
yeah, it's so exciting.
Yeah.
Dame's website discusses the importance of a healthier relationship with pleasure and addressing the pleasure gap. Can you describe what this means to you and how Dame's work reflects this mission?
Yeah, I think on a really like simpler, easy to digest marketing kind of campaign, the pleasure gap is the gap between, honestly, like cisgenders in their experience of pleasure. Women are 4 times more likely to say sex has been not at all pleasurable in the past year. They have way less orgasms. I think kind of no matter how you slice it, I think the idea of femininity is often to put other people's pleasures and joy in front of your own, which I will say too, like there is something kind of beautiful. There's something a little bit beautiful about that, but then I think it's also really important to carve out time where we put ourselves first and are making sure that that's like really, we can't give unless we are full, or I believe that, or we can give so much better when we are full. And so to me, closing the pleasure gap is closing that diversity, which, I would argue it's bigger than the confidence gap. And I'm sure is a factor in the confidence gap. It's a bigger gap than the wage gap, or, it's all pretty subjective where we put numbers to it, but it is a really big difference. You just talk to people about what is bad sex. It's a really big difference between cis men and non-cis men, pretty much, and like what could potentially really be bad sex. And so we want to close that gap. I also think there's just a gap for everybody. It's just the whole world in our being really connected with pleasure, being connected with sexual pleasure in a way that feels good before sex, during sex, and after sex. And that we have a lot more to learn just about what it means to have a full, well life through pleasure, because it's such a guiding force. Just being connected with that. I just, making decisions based on how things feel is really important, and making sure we value pleasure is really important.
Definitely. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. So the next question that we have is, in what ways have you encountered stigma in the sexual wellness industry, either from those outside the industry or even from others who are working in the same space? And what have you learned about how to push back against this stigma?
I've faced a lot of stigma. There's stigma in the perception of what's going to sell and what kind of products should exist within the industry. A lot of this industry historically has been wrapped up, actually not really historically. Originally, vibrators and products that were for female sexual pleasure were a little bit more in the wellness, beauty, health space. And then because of porn laws, or not porn laws, but indecency laws, it kind of got grouped into this whole category of the adult market of the seedy markets. And then, so a lot of the buyers, a lot of the understanding around what is important in a product is in line kind of also with those stores, which I don't think ultimately felt like safe spaces to a lot of people who were the key benefactors of vibrators. So there's just like stigma around like such silly things too. Like I remember people being like, oh, that product's small, people aren't gonna want it. I was just like, that is not true. Bigger is not better always. I think that's like a one concept that I see in the space. Bigger is better. Very few, like, most of our products are designed for clitoral stimulation when that's like not necessarily the norm. A lot of other brands have mostly internal. And I think again, that's the idea of like who's designing these products and what do they think the users of the products really, really want. There's stigma when it comes to raising capital. There's stigma when I've been trying to get into stores. When I first started the company, and of course there's advertising stigma, which has got to be like the biggest one. So, I mean, like when I wanted to launch, we launched on Indiegogo, which is a crowdfunding site. We originally wanted to launch on Kickstarter, and Kickstarter wouldn't let us use the platform. They have like, erotic films that are like, artsy and things like that, but they just viewed what we were doing as problematic. And then for our second toy, once they saw the brand and they got to know us, they changed their policy, which was really cool. And I would say a big learning for me with things like that was that they changed their policy, and they even were like, oh, isn't our policy based on our credit card processors policy? A lot of this stuff kind of comes back to credit card processing, and that wasn't necessarily true. So making changes in institutions is so hard. It's never just one person, it's a bunch of people. And sometimes it's not just one institution, it's numerous institutions. And getting them all to like be on the same page can be challenging, but totally doable. And then I would say the biggest, challenge I face still is around advertising. So Meta on Facebook and Instagram, and honestly, TikTok is also just like, in some ways worse. You cannot advertise products that are for pleasure, but you can advertise erectile dysfunction medication, and you can advertise premature ejaculation products, which I don't know what those products are for if they're not for pleasure. And I would definitely ask you to really think about why you think men having sex and being aroused for sex is somehow more medical and less about pleasure, but about health. Like nobody needs to have an erection in order to live. It is something we do to feel alive. And, I've heard some people say, well, there's some people need it in order to procreate. Like that is not who is buying erectile dysfunction medication. There might be a very small percentage of people who that is what they are using it for, but let's be like, that's not the case. And we certainly don't need the premature. And again, like I think that they should be able to advertise. It's just that you should also let us advertise too. I really struggle with the idea or the way I've seen how advertised policies stands up the idea that men need erections and need sex as a part of their health, but that whether or not the receivers of those erections enjoy it, that doesn't matter. And like that's not impactful for health. That is just prurient is often the word that is flung at me. And it has drastically impacted my business too. The financials, the ability to grow, as well as our ability to innovate, our ability to support the initiatives we want to support in the world. And of course, my ability to just grow my own wealth, which I feel like, that's also that, Alex, that's a valid thing to care about. I'm going to admit that feels crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of that. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to how you as like a person and as a leader of this company, as well as just the company itself, how you have been able to kind of push back against all these different sources of stigma that you described.
Okay, so we've done a bunch of activations that have pushed back against things. Like we sued the New York City subway system because they said we could run ads, and then they said we couldn't. Even they said they don't work with any sexually oriented brands. Meanwhile, there's like a 20-foot flaccid cactus like on the subway. So we sued them, which feels like a lot more than just an activation. And we won the rights to run those ads. I will say policies are murky, and I would be interested to see what would happen if we tried to run those ads again. And it felt very much like, they didn't let us show the product, and they were so specific about what we really could run in the end. And I was just like, I'm just going to take this as a win, but there are still so much of that behind the scenes that was really frustrating and doesn't feel as much as a win. But we got a huge conversation starter simply by suing them too. And that feels really great. I personally believe and have made it clear to my people that work for me that there's just no way we can fight for pleasure equality in the world and be silent when it comes to reproductive justice. Like, those things are really, really intertwined for a whole number of reasons. So we've definitely done things to raise money and awareness and raise conversation around reproductive health. Namely, recently we made Mitch McConnell dildos, like they're dildos with Mitch McConnell's face on them. We still have some. All the money went to support abortion access. And it was funny, which I personally am very pro. Like, if we can bring humor to it and levity, I think that's a positive thing, even though it is something really serious. And then on like a personal note, like I do think it's really important that like I share, like I feel comfortable sharing my narrative and my stories and my experiences. So I do my best to share those, and also then hold spaces for other people to share and have those conversations. Honestly, it's how we come up with a lot of product ideas. Like deciding to make gummies was straight up from this conversation I watched other people have in a DAME space around the impacts of SSRIs on their libido and like what they could be doing, like what kind of supplemental products they could be taking to support that.
Yeah, thank you for all that. That leads really nicely into our next question about inclusivity. So how do you see the importance of inclusivity in the sexual wellness industry? How do you as a leader and DAME as a company work to increase inclusivity within this space?
You know what I think is, okay, I think sometimes the most important thing when we're talking about inclusivity is actually defining like sometimes exclusivity first, or like who are your psychodemographic, like what, how do I phrase this? Okay, we mostly design products for vulvas and vaginas. They're designed to go in to specific parts of the body. We have not touched the butthole yet, but one day I dream of it. And that will be a more inclusive product because more people have buttholes than vaginas. But we're designing for vaginas. We're not designing for women. We're not designing, so like what are you designing for? And then think about, okay, what are the people that that's true for that maybe we don't immediately think of? And those are the demographics I think that you want to make sure you're being inclusive of. I find like, people talk about, I don't know, like our products are designed for a specific genitalia. And I think that that's also important. And I get a lot of people who don't understand that and think that we're being exclusive when we say like for people with vulvas, both people who identify as women who somehow feel excluded by that terminology, which I think is interesting. And also you know, like, is that, you know, not being inclusive enough? Because like not everybody has a vagina and a vulva. But I think that that's okay. Um, that's what we're designing for, as long as we're upfront and honest about it. When we're designing products too, we try to make sure we have like a wide range of demographics, sexuality, age. Age is a huge one when it comes to sex, because our bodies change, our relationship to sex really changes. And in fact, I could see a world to where we're designing products kind of to specific age ranges or specific life moments, because they are different. So I don't know. I think there's something about inclusivity that's also like, to me, that's really important about it, or feels like it goes like a level deeper than what sometimes feels like inclusivity means you put a rainbow flag on it or whatever, is like just be defining who you're speaking to still, or who you're designing for. And then, you know, really just checking your blind spots as much as possible. And also just like, somebody once told me, like, you know, fumble humbly, like you're never gonna not, or like, I'm a white woman, I am never gonna stop fucking up. Like I'm gonna keep probably making some mistakes every now and then. It's gonna happen. Like, you know, and she said, like, you know, just you try to do your best to fumble humbly, and like when you mess up, to be open and honest and like hear about it. I don't know. I feel like I went off there a little bit.
No, that was great. Thank you so much for sharing. So our next question is also about inclusivity, but is looking a little bit more about the perspective, like from a student's perspective. So the question is, how can we as students promote inclusivity and confront stigma in the sexual wellness industry through our own actions or activism, or just even like the conversations that we have, our perspective,
You want to
etc.
know? It's a great. I want to say compassion is also like just really key to inclusivity. Both. I find that share your personal stories, share like, you know, your journeys, and we have so many assumptions about it. And like, I'm sure, as you guys know, like with the LGBT community, like literally so many people had never met a gay person. And as more people just know more gay people, the stigma has really shifted, and political alignment has really shifted. And that was a really big part of the movement. And also just, you know, so many people didn't feel like they could come out. So if you do feel like you can come out, coming out is really powerful. As somebody who like identifies as like baby queer, like I'm married to, like I look like this, I'm pregnant right now, I have a husband that's very mask presenting, like, but I've definitely identify as queer. I've had intimate relationships with non-men, and talking about that, even though like it could be really easy for me to just like shut up in a conversation and like, you know, let things slide, but like not like, I don't know, owning that if you're like, I really want to encourage people to own your little bit of queerness. If you're a little bit queer, like do that. Tell people, like when they're like, if they're talking about gay people, but you've made out with somebody of the same sex, even if you don't identify as gay, you should just say it out loud. Just be like, you know, I did that thing that one time. And then also, like, to turn this on the head, I am really passionate about trying to come at things with curiosity and be inclusive of people who are not as progressive or don't understand, like people who do like literally I had somebody kind of comment on something recently saying they thought that the term cis women was derogatory towards women. which I think is from, I did my best to come at it with curiosity and just be like, hey, can you tell me more about why it makes you feel that way? Like, I really do want to be inclusive and not of that person and that person's perspective. Like, a lot is changing in the world for people. And I do think that that is going to ultimately lead to a better world. And I think a more inclusive world than telling that person they're a bad person, or telling that person, making that person feel either stupid or full of hate. That person is having their own personal experience. It's probably wrapped up in a lot of other shit. And I don't know, I do feel like I've been watching the world get, I know this is silly, but like, a lot of these things shouldn't be, they're not a big deal. Like, guns are a big deal. Like, kids dying at school is a fucking big deal. Trans people in the bathroom just does not feel like a big deal. But we've made it such a big deal because of, I think, the way we've been having discourse around it. I don't know if you guys feel that way. That's how I feel.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. I really appreciated your point on compassion, and sorry about the background noise over here. So I kind of have a long-winded question, but I think it's really important for a lot of the students in this reproductive justice space. So a lot of the students on the call today are studying public health and are interested in sexual and reproductive health or reproductive justice. When we study sexual health, we're often looking at topics of like STIs, sex education, abortion, family planning, but like pleasure is really left out of the conversation. How do you see Dame's work and sexual pleasure fitting into these conversations?
Crazy. I have background noise. Sorry. I'm gonna really quickly close the door. See how pregnant I am. Okay. I also I'm gonna go a little bit backwards for a second in questions and then answer that question. So I used to work at Planned Parenthood. I helped facilitate abortions and did the counseling. I was living in a state of Missouri. You had literally had to ask people like, had they considered adoption, show them an ultrasound. So it was pretty wild stuff. And then I was like a professional hand holder. And I cannot tell you the amount of women that I saw who needed to tell me that they were pro-life, who were really doing something that they politically did not align with, that they were going to still go out and vote against this establishment, even though they were using that service. And I think what I learned from that experience is like, okay, one, that is so infuriating and frustrating, but like to have compassion for what that experience is like. People are just like, you're there. I'm definitely concerned about the mental health of somebody who has felt like they had to go against their moral, like, compass, or like their morality, and had to live with that. And you want is to help them see that this is why it's actually not morally wrong, is because so many people have to make the decisions you've honestly, like 90% of them were just putting the kids they already had in front of a potential future kid. Like that was probably mostly the experience that I witnessed. I don't know. So that actually really ultimately didn't make me angrier at the opposition or whatever, but have more compassion and just like perspective for that. And then your question about pleasure being included. There's just so many other people I want to like point you guys to. Well, one, there's a book called Pleasure Activism by Adrienne Marie Brown, which I feel like, I hope you guys have heard of the book already, but maybe not. And she talks a lot about incorporating pleasure in our activism too. And if we can make, whenever we can make something pleasurable, it's easier to do. Like that is the way, we often follow the path of least resistance. Pleasure is literally how we can create like neural pathways like that. So creating a pleasure, I think, can change the world. I think that ultimately healthy sex is supposed to feel good. It is supposed to be pleasurable. And if it is not pleasurable, I think that then it's unhealthy. I think that there's a lot more nuance there. And I also think that pleasure, again, like when therapy is fun, we go to more therapy. Like when we can feel the joy of that release, even though sometimes it's first felt with a good cry or something, I think we are way more likely to continue to do those things. So I just think too, like, I guess what I'm just saying is like, it's also not like pain and pleasure. It's so much more nuanced than that too. And these things kind of go hand in hand. And I think pleasure is a part of those conversations, because ultimately we're trying to help people to live a life worth living. And what makes life worth living? It's not just about not being sick. It's about enjoying not being sick, or enjoying being a little sick. If you're like chronic, like still trying to find pleasure, and wherever we can is important.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing it. That is everything that you just said is very much in line with what we learn in like the intro public health classes, that like the definition of health is not just the absence of disease, but it's like health as something that is more akin to like thriving than just like not being ill,
And
so
I mean, also feel like listening to Esther Perel too, and what she, like when we talk about eros and we talk about like sex, like this, there's surviving and then there's thriving, and like pleasure in is in this thriving space a little bit more. And like I do think, yes, I agree with everything. It's just so interesting too, hearing you guys talk about like that's the definition, because so often I feel like outside of that education, the concept of health really is like when I think about the whole erectile dysfunction versus pleasure products debate that I'm constantly input into, like there's this idea that an erection is medical and it's health. And I don't know, this idea that like health is more important than pleasure, or health is more important than well-being, when I think health is really kind of like the holistic thing, and then there's illness and like positive health. Man, I would love to take that class. I'm like very curious now.
Yeah, that it's just so interesting to see how these conversations about like sexual wellness and pleasure, they do fit so well into these like public health frameworks that I think for a lot of people, a lot of the students on this call are just kind of second nature, because we take so many classes in, like epidemiology, program design, and like for all of that, the kind of basis of everything is like, how do you conceptualize health? How do different communities understand health and well-being?
How do you also make space when you go out there in the world too, to help people? Like I remember, because when I was working at Planned Parenthood, most people were social workers and stuff, and I definitely felt like how in those moments, or I would listen to them chat a lot too about feeling like they were just getting there to help with just pull people up just from the from that bottom, versus getting to also help them really experience pleasure. So I don't know, I hope that you guys can also help figure out how that gets incorporated, like woven in to like the full process. I don't know what I'm talking about now. I feel very...
No, I mean, that's why
I'm
we're
just a capitalist these days, guys. I've gone to the dark side.
I mean, that's why we're having this conversation and just like opening this space up for everyone. So thank you.
I well, I get it. Thank you guys for having me here so we can have this conversation. And I also think, asking people, literally just saying like, are you finding pleasure in life? Are you finding joy? How is your sex life? Being asked those questions by somebody that is an authority gives you space to be like, these things are important. From an authoritative perspective.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Okay, so we have one last question from us, and then we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. So for everybody who is in the audience, start thinking about what you want to ask. And while you're doing that, I will ask our last question, which is just, where can the people on this call find your products or find more information about Dame?
Dame.com. I mean, on social media, we're Dame Products. I'm a fine human because I'm Alexandra Fine and I'm a human. And that's where you can find more about it. I will say, starting Friday, we have a dope Mother's Day sale because moms deserve pleasure too. So wait for that. Or I can also make like a UCL code or something like that if you guys. But yes, discounts are happening. So check it out. See what we're slinging.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And also, I personally would definitely recommend checking out the Dame Instagram. You have to see, if you have not already seen it, the reproductive justice Mitch McConnell dildo, you have to see it. Whatever you're describing in your head or whatever you're thinking about in your head, it's better than that. You have to look at the picture.
I heard some complaints about it that I thought were so funny. Somebody said that it didn't have enough chins, which if you think about it, would be good for a dildo. And I was like, good point. You know what I mean? And then somebody else just like wrote a review of it and they gave it 1 star and they just wrote flaccid. And I just thought that also just killed me. You never like normally make products that you want people to love, but this product is not that. It's just so silly. So check it out. It's silly.
Whoa. That's amazing. Okay, so we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. Please feel free to use the raise hand function or write your question in the chat. Does anyone have a question right off the bat? I have a few that I'd be happy to ask if others don't. Okay, great. Asha, you go first.
Hi. First of all, I just want to say thank you for taking time to engage in these discussions with all of us. It's something we don't really get a chance to do at FSPH, and especially in my department. I'm an epidemiology student, and so I really just don't get the opportunity to have discussions like this in my coursework or in my community as much. So it's just really rewarding, and I'm so happy to hear that. I'm so happy to hear about all the work you're doing, and it's fantastic. My main question is just surrounding more cultural stigma if we're thinking about having these conversations, outside of the US or outside of California even, and just thinking about how not everyone has the privilege to be able to engage in these conversations in a school setting, even if they don't have even though some of us here may not have that opportunity to have discussions like this with our families or with our closer networks, we at least have this outlet to engage in these discussions. But some individuals don't even have that. And so just thinking about more from a perspective globally, folks in other countries who might not have this opportunity, how do we combat those cultural stigmas and societal stigmas that exist outside of the US or even outside of our bubble here in California?
I think that's a great question. I don't think we can just go into other countries too and just take our perspective and like dump it on them. I think often we have to meet people where they are. So there was like so much in there because I do even feel like even some people in California, depending on your family dynamics, like you might not have access. I mean, I think most people have access to the internet, which can usually be a place for that, like having at least that one channel or somewhere to go with these thoughts and feelings and get access to research and conversations, which is just amazing. I remember growing up, like the internet, I mean, it existed, but like I was one of the first people I knew to have a personal computer, which was like both a huge privilege. But I'm 35, by the way, but like most people my age had like a shared computer in their family where you were not going to go online and be like, how do I give a blowjob? Or is this normal? Or whatever it is. So I think that it's really important to kind of like address people where they're at and kind of figure out where, like, what is that next step forward? We've done some work and also like providing safety and reframing things in the context of health often is really important. I still find that to be really effective. Like, you know, it's not like, I think pleasure is really important, but also, did you know orgasms help reduce stress, and like orgasms can boost your immune system and help you sleep better, and like that kind of stuff is really effective in the world. Also, I've done some work with female genital mutilation and trying to prevent that mostly in Africa. And I remember our first time we went to go support this organization, they told us that actually we were harming the organization if we publicly disclosed that we were helping them, because they didn't want their opposition on the ground to be like, look at these like feminist witch in America, like that's what they want. I mean, I'm saying witch, I'm sure it was, I don't know this witch. That would be honored to be witch, but that it was so much that it, you know, like that, am I making any sense here? Like, and that ultimately caused more harm than good. And that was, again, just super eye-opening to me and really interesting. So I think it's holding space, making sure that things aren't like, sometimes it is like that, it feels to me like it's further steps away, but I also think that that's a very like ethnocentric perspective, that we are more, that we have it figured out. But I do think just meeting people where they are, asking people why, staying curious with them, giving them facts, like that's like the best we can do. I do think, like, you know, I mean, I'm working on this every day, which is just like people are from different generations and different places. And it's important to have like hold space for that and not be judgmental.
That's great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your commentary about like the value of having these conversations with valuing the conversation itself and the progress, not just something that's outcome oriented and like, you know,
You just
looking
said
at
it so much better than
goal.
me. Is that what I said? There's no way that's what I said. That was very well articulated. In a conversation, I'm going to start saying that because I think that is so important versus just valuing the outcome of the conversation. I think that's key. And I think it's just so hard. That was a hard question to answer.
Yeah, and I'm sorry. It was such a loaded question, but you
That was
answered.
good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So there's a question in the chat from Claire that I'm going to read. Claire is asking, first of all, I'm loving this conversation so much. Thank you for being here and sharing this info. They are a sex researcher and actively working at tackling things like the orgasm gap, pleasure gap, painful sex, etc. One of the things they've noticed is this dichotomy where cis heterosexual men seem to center sexual satisfaction around enthusiasm, and lots of cis women, LGBTQ individuals, etc., center it around pain or boundary violation. Is this something you've noticed or experienced?
Yes.
Do you have any thoughts on this?
It's so sad. I mean, like, I feel like that's my full thought. Isn't that so sad? I've totally noticed that and think that that is a pretty true statement. I think that our concept even around like what sex is. Like if you ask somebody, how do you know you're having sex? Most people will tell you it's when a penis goes inside of a vagina, like whether you're the penis haver or the vagina haver. How do you know when sex ended? Sex ended when the penis ejaculates. Like the whole narrative, like the main character energy is definitely the dick, and like your vagina is supporting. And I think that, of course, sets us up for all of the things that were mentioned in the question around pain and enthusiasm versus pain, defining what is good sex. I can't even tell you how often when I'm like, I wanted to run an advertisement once that was just like, sex is supposed to feel good. Like that was it. And I got so much pushback. They were like, you can't tell people that. They already know that. Like that's, it was somebody with a penis who was just like, we already know that that's pushing a prurient value. I'm like, no, I am telling you that there are half of the population is being told that they're supposed to lie there and take it at some point. And that like, it might hurt their first time, which, I will say, like, I do think that biologically, maybe there might always be a little bit more pain for vagina havers. I'm not positive, but it definitely doesn't need to be like the narrative it is. And the fact that we're not talking about it isn't optimizing it and making it better for the people who should be centered in the conversation, who should be the main character energy, because they are more likely to have pain.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. We only have a few minutes left. Ashley, do you think we should try for one more question quickly, or should we close it out?
Let's do one more question. I mean, I wish we could carry this conversation on all day. So let's try to do one more quick question.
Great. Sabrina, is your question can it be answered in a few minutes?
I think it can. So my question is related to, I currently work with domestic violence survivors. So I was wondering if you had any advice regarding opening up that conversation with individuals who have been victimized in a sexual way, and how to promote like healthy sexual choices in their lives, and how to even have those conversations with them. Because once you've been traumatized by it, it's kind of a scary interaction to even have with them. And so proceeding after that, they don't really want to touch anything regarding any relationships or individuals that even look similar to the ones that have attacked them or abused them. So I was wondering if you had any advice on how sex toys would be able to provide like a little opening for those conversations, or how can they be used in that way?
I mean, I do think that solo play is such a powerful pathway to re-engage, because it doesn't involve anybody else except for you, where you can really develop trust on your own, and you can explore whatever you want to explore in the context of your own brain, and then start to kind of understand sex in your own body on your own terms. I think finding a trauma informed therapist or a trauma informed sex therapist is really, really powerful. I do think that also sex has been, like, I know a lot of people who have described sex as being a very important part of their healing process. I even know some people who have described kink as being a very important part of their healing process, in either reclaiming whatever it is they want to reclaim for themselves as for themselves. Everybody's different. I don't think you can't push. If every time you are touched a certain way, you have a flashback, like, it's going to take some time and processing that you should do outside of being touched in that way, but in a safer space with a therapist. And then I do think in re-engaging and reprocessing those physical feelings with a toy can be really powerful. And I think that's all you can do is just let them know that these are options. And there are some really great books out there. I think Dr. Holly Richmond wrote one that is specifically about sexual healing, post-sexual trauma.
Great. Okay, so I know that it's 1 o'clock. We do want to be respectful of everybody's time. I'm so sorry that there were some questions that we weren't able to get to, but we want to thank everybody again so much for coming to this event. We are so thrilled with how it went, so excited to talk to you. And yeah, just thank you everyone again for your time. I'm gonna send the Instagram handles for both Dame and Al in the chat, as well as the Dame website again. And then just to close out, somebody did ask if there's any way that students could get in touch with you, if they had any follow-up questions or anything that we weren't able to ask today.
DM me on Instagram. I want to say that email me, but honestly, I am more responsive in Instagram than I am in my emails, which is crazy. You can also find me on LinkedIn or wherever. And honestly, the fact that there's more questions, like I'm always looking for questions so I can make more social media content. So send me those questions. I will answer them. On social media.
Amazing. Thank you again so much, everybody, for being here. And Al, thank you so much for your time. Like I said before,